Good morning and thanks for joining me today. Today we are going to go out and take a look at the garden trellises that I've built over the last couple weeks. This has been a long haul of a job, but I thought it turned out pretty nice. I was aiming for a neo-medieval kind of a look, if that's even a thing, but I'm pretty happy with the way they turned out. So with that being said, I don't want to waste a whole bunch of time doing this little intro speech thing, so let's get outside and get at it right away. All right, so these two trellises behind me are what I've been working at for the last 2 weeks here, roughly. So if you like what you see here, stick around because we're going to build them. Okay, so I wanted to give these things a really rough kind of hewn out with an axe look. And how I'm trying to achieve that is I used my angle grinder, as you can see here, with a flapper wheel, or not a flapper wheel, but a flap disc. I'm currently using an 80 grit disc. I switched to the 40 grit disc later. 40 grit disc was the smarter way to go. It was way faster. You know, and you wouldn't have to do this if you didn't want to, if you wanted to keep it a nice refined look. But I thought that the rough look would do really, really well with the woven kind of latticey thing. And I figured that the waviness of it would accentuate this, and it actually, I think it turned out doing quite well at that. So that's what we're doing here, is we're just kind of randomly going at the board, and yeah. At this point, I realized that I had left the window open in my Jeep after I hauled the lumber home, so all of the sawdust was blowing directly into my Jeep, and yeah. So then I grabbed my orbital sander. That's been a really, really handy tool, and it made very quick work of this. Just trying to smooth it out. I didn't want to put a whole bunch of effort into sanding it and making it really smooth, because that just wasn't the point of this. If a guy took the time and made them really smooth, I'm sure that the stain that I used would really, really make the grains pop. But like I said, that wasn't exactly the goal. I didn't want them to be super, super smooth and fancy. I just wanted them to be rough and smooth enough that you're not catching your fingers on them or snagging and getting slivers and all that good stuff. You'll notice I had this thing screwed down. I just don't like the boards wandering around while I'm using the angle grinder on them, so I screwed them down. I don't mind the fact that there's a couple small screw holes in it here and there. You don't really notice them once it's assembled, so I just went ahead and did that anyways. It just made life a lot easier. Okay, where's my board here? There we go. Yeah. I don't know if you can actually see that or not, but I decided I didn't want to be absolutely filthy, so I threw on some coveralls. I figured while I was taking a little break here and I had some lunch, I'd show you what I'm using. This is just one of those flapper discs for an angle grinder, 40 grit. I think the Walters are probably the best brand out there. They seem to last the longest, at least when you're working with steel. I don't think it would make a difference with wood. And then I clean up the mess I made with these guys. Oh, I'm shaky. Just 80 grit. So take out the angle grinder and have at her with another board. At this point I've got the 40 grit disc installed, and wow, did that make a difference. That sped things up phenomenally. It was almost kind of scary because you didn't have complete control over the 40 grit disc, especially after I was using a worn out 80 grit disc on there. When I put this on, it really cranked up the speed of things and made this a lot more enjoyable. You know, just to make a fair reference here, I put the grinding on this board and the last board both at the same speed They're both running at 16 times normal speed here. And this board, this one ended up taking 1 minute and 18 seconds, including sanding. And the first one ended up taking 2 minutes and 41 seconds, including the sanding. So all credit to my friend, the 40 grit disc there. That was good. It really cranked up the speed of things. Oh yeah. Looks like we're getting wet here. Okay. I went ahead and I got my boards all roughed up and weird looking, and it's time to put some color on them. I want them to look like this one. I did that one a few days ago just to see if I liked it being this roughed up, and turns out I do. So we're gonna use some we're gonna use some Minwax. It's a penetrating stain. It's a transparent, but yeah, it looks great. Personally, if I'm going to use a stain, this is what I'm going to use. It works wonderfully, and it's dry to the touch within probably 5 minutes of putting it on. You don't need any fancy tools. A little sawdust in your paint, or in your stain, I guess. It doesn't hurt it. I'm just putting it on with an old rag. All right, let's get you guys out of the way so we can review. Oh, hang on, I'm gonna get filthy. Get on there. So I really like putting on this Minwax with a rag. I know you could do it a lot faster if you used a brush, but with the rag, I find that you can actually control the placement of the stain a little bit better. If you want it to get heavier in some spots and get some spots a little bit darker, you just go over it another time in that one spot, scrub a little bit harder, and it seems to get a little bit more color into it. A brush would have worked fine, but it would have been harder to control exactly how much stain I was actually putting on the board. So I chose to use the rag. The one hard part with using the rag is that it's hard to get into some of the deeper spots. Like I left some really rough stuff on these because that's the look I was going for. So in some of the deeper rough spots, I did have a challenge getting the stain into them, and that's where a brush really would have shined, but I didn't want to dirty up a brush for that, so I just took my time and squished it in with the rag. All in all, I think it turned out fairly well, so I'm going to continue using this method. Good. Yeah. There's a little bit of dusties on the one of them, but otherwise, they all turned out basically perfect. I am quite satisfied, and I think that's going to make a wonderful looking trellis. Okay, it's time to start assembling the frame a little bit here. At this point, I still haven't went over and ripped the all of the interior pieces yet. I don't have my own table saw, so I have to go over and borrow the neighbor's one. So I have to work on their schedule. It is what it is. In the meantime, I figured I may as well get the frame built up. So at this point, I'm just getting my verticals nice and straight. You didn't really see it in here, but I stuffed a board up underneath of them and jammed it up tight against the bottom of the 2x6 there, and that's how I kept it at the right height. Now you'll see here, I got a rope tied around there. Well, my boards, they kind of warped themselves a little bit after I went after them with the angle grinder. I didn't expect that to happen. I didn't, but it makes sense that it would happen. But they were pretty straight beforehand, but I just used the rope to tie it up so I could get up there and screw it down. I did have a little bit of a difficult time with the upright that it would be on the left-hand side of the screen there. It was twisted a little bit, so I tried getting crescent wrench on it to twist it. That didn't work very well, so I ended up grabbing it with a set of those plumbing pliers, and I reefed it over and jammed a screw in it. Okay, well, it didn't take you long for this part because it was at my neighbor's place. I don't have a table saw, but I got my vertical wattle pieces, I don't know what you'd actually call them or what the correct term is, ripped out of 2x4s. They are 1 inch by 1.5 inch by, I guess, 58 and a half. 58 and a half. On the two that are going on the outsides, you'll see I've got holes pre-drilled and countersunk. I got 3 of them, one in the middle, one on each end, and then the other ones I did the similar thing, except let's see if I can get that in the camera. I put them through at a 45 so that they come out the bottom of the thing. They don't actually have to be strong, they just have to hold the slats in place, and then once the slats are actually in place, the slats will do 90% of the work, at least theoretically. So we're just going to put some color on these guys, get them stained up to match the rest of the frame, and then while those dry up a little bit, I'm going to get the horizontal slats cut, and we should be good, I think. Well, I'm sure you already get the point about staining the boards. I just wanted to put this in here because I tried something different here that did not work very well for me. I tried staining the same side on all of the boards simultaneously instead of doing an entire board at a time, and that did not work out very well for me, so I just ended up going back to doing a single board at a time. Worked better. Well, back to this assembly kicker here. Now that we got all the pieces cut and stained, or it's time to get back at her. So I put the vertical pieces on the outside there first, as you can see. And then I jammed the bottom frame piece up against that as tight as I could with a mallet. And that made it a very, very nice fit. And then I drilled it and sunk the screws in it. It didn't have to be strong, but it actually ended up really, really strong. I can climb on that and it won't break. Granted, I'm only 140 some pounds, but pretty strong nonetheless. So I'm getting my vertical pieces in. I wish that I'd have done this differently. I had a brain fart when I was doing this. I got the board centered, and then I pushed them off center about 1/8 of an inch, because when I put the screws in, the board would slide about 1/8 of an inch until the screws were perfectly tight. I didn't figure this out until I got onto the last vertical piece here, that I could just put a clamp on it, as you'll see, and then it doesn't slide. I can't believe that that logic totally eluded me like that. Shame on me. But whatever, it is what it is. And then it's just a matter of sliding the slats in. It's pretty easy. You just have to be really, really careful because they're only a quarter of an inch thick and they do like to break on you if you aren't careful. I only had one of them break. Now, although stacking them on there that tight like that isn't the actual goal, I'm doing it for a reason so I can see what it looks like, because I'm thinking about building a perimeter fence around the garden area just like that too, and I think that would look really cool. But let's get this thing finished, at least get the slats put in. And now on to the very tedious part here. I wanted a 50-50 board to void ratio, so I ended up spacing them all 1.5 inches apart, of course. It was pretty easy to get the measurements. You just tacked 3 on to whatever your previous measurement was, and that's where you position the board. But right now I don't want to talk about that. I want to take this last couple minutes here and talk about just how much these things actually cost me. There wasn't a whole lot go into them in terms of materials. When I finished up my second one here, I was left with a chunk of 2x4 that would have been 1 3/4 inches wide instead of the 3.5. So I used precisely 7.5 2x4s on each trellis. Let's get my calculator out here and figure out exactly how much we're looking at here. So I used 7.5 2x4s. I think they're $4.80 a piece. So there was $36, roughly $36 in 2x4s that I used, and then $5 worth of screws and nails, as well as I ended up using about, I would say, 150 milliliters of stain to do the entire frame, and a liter of stain was $20, so I got like $3-4 worth of stain in there, so let's add another $4 into there. Comes out to about $45, and that's really all I've got into each one of these trellises. So I've obviously got 2 trellises here, so you can multiply that by 2 into $90. So for less than $100, I built the 2 trellises. The real expense here was not the money, but the time. If you didn't have the time, this just wouldn't be possible. Probably got about 20 hours tied up into each one, but a lot of that is literally just sitting there scratching my head because I'm not the best carpenter around. At any rate, we're just about done nailing on slats, so time for me to stop talking. $57 of these tiny little nails into each trellis. Somehow I only managed to whack my fingers 9 times. 9? Maybe a dozen. It's a good thing I'm not swinging hard.